Is David Brudenell, who is the Executive Director of Australia's only publicly listed AI company, Decider. Thanks so much for your time. First of all, what concerns you most about this budget?
Well, I think it's really a fascinating one because it's not necessarily just about politics. There's also structural issues going on. The CGT tax structure as it stands. I mean, it's great to see that the government wants to go into consultation, but our take is that we see a lot of sovereign risks that come from this. I mean, in the cross there, you were just talking about entrepreneurs, and I've been an entrepreneur in Australia, though it doesn't sound like it, for 25 years. And you give up a lot. You take an enormous amount of risk to build something new, giving up lower salaries, superannuation contributions, in the hope of a good return in the future sometime. And with the current CGT, it really puts that up for grabs. So I think there's a lot of kind of sovereign risks. I see three currently coming into market. The first one is talent from a sovereign capability. For startups, for people who want to have great ideas. Now going to Singapore, going to the United States seems like a better option because Australia has one of the highest tax rates in the world on growth or on profits. The second thing is when you start to think about investments from foreign investors now investing in Australian companies, that limits the amount of domestic investment in terms of venture capital going into these companies as well. So, as we look at a sovereign nation, do we want to have our innovations owned by foreign countries? And the third thing, I think it stifles innovation. When you think about artificial intelligence, I think it really goes to, the amount of new companies that are going to be created because of AI. Just like the internet, which was an everywhere technology, AI is an everywhere technology. And kind of for the first time, entrepreneurs or tech people who want to just start their businesses can now have the power of enterprise businesses, which had thousands of employees. And so there's going to be more startups than ever before by a factor that the world hasn't really seen before. So I think there's a real structural sovereign issue. And when you think about what happened, like the world has taken one step into the fourth industrial revolution. The last one was manufacturing, where we productized how to manufacture things. And what artificial intelligence does is we are going to essentially productize knowledge. And there are millions of knowledge workers in Australia that have been invested, that our country has invested in. And at the moment, what's happening is they're using these large artificial intelligence tools like Anthropic and OpenAI, which are extracting their knowledge, and it's renting it back to them at increasing costs. And so when we think about the...
Sorry, David. Yeah, it's just extraordinary. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought there, but it occurred to me as we talk to you in the context of this budget, what is keeping Decider here? If these CGT changes go through unamended, would you consider leaving?
Yeah, well, you could tell from my amazing Australian accent, I wasn't born here, but I am a newly minted Australian, so I have an Australian family. But Decider is proudly made in Australia. We're publicly listed, so we don't suffer from some of the CGT concessions that are being proposed now. But our business does support tens of thousands of small businesses, and many of them will be thinking about some of the things that I just mentioned earlier. When you create a business, whether it's a coffee shop or a technology company, we have to realize that artificial intelligence will be pervasive across both those and everywhere in between over the next couple of years. And if you're going to invest in that, put your own capital in or source capital to get going, and you don't have a return or it's going to be taxed as heavily as it's proposed to be, I think people will start to look elsewhere. I've been working in technology for 25 years, and so I have big networks all over the world. I was privileged to work in Saudi Arabia, in Scandinavia, and in the US. And people in Australia and my circles, they're looking at me and they're texting me and saying, maybe we should start in another country. And Singapore is about the same distance from here to Perth, right? So it's not that big of a leap to be able to create a company in a much better location to kind of reap the rewards of your good work or your innovative work.
What's the view of Australia? Not just after this budget, but perhaps the shorter-term view of Australia. Do we support entrepreneurs? Do we support business taking risk? Again, David, why are you here, other than your Australian family?
Yeah. Well, I think Australia is a wonderful place, and when you start to think about the new knowledge economy that's been created, there's two agentic superpowers today, which is China and the United States. But as Australia has a good shot, in geopolitical world, Australia has an excellent reputation. And if you believe what I'm saying, which is we're about to export knowledge, I think there's a lot of countries that want to buy what Australia has, the way that we operate, the way that we govern, the way that we teach. These are all going to become exportable functions and assets in this new knowledge economy or this agentic economy, which is being rapidly created.
Seizing that and shaping it and exploiting it, for want of a better term, rather than it just letting us happen to us here?
Yeah. Well, we're aggressively doing that at Decider. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But if your question is more largely across the nation, I think when we look at the third industrial revolution, is where does Australia sit in that epoch, right? So Australia is very good at the downstream activities of mining those critical minerals and those energy. But those critical minerals, those critical metals and energy are being kind of exported to other countries who make brilliant mobile phones, who capture most of the value. So, Australia's in a dangerous position at the moment because, at the moment we're doing the same things that we did in the last revolution, which is supply the downstream activities. Australia doesn't want to be the data center backyard of the new global AI army. We want to be able to produce knowledge. We want to be able to export that knowledge to foreign nations because Australia has a great reputation within the world, and we've invested heavily, right, in our citizens, and we want to be able to export to that world, but also protect it. Right, there's this new category of knowledge security, which is, let's keep the knowledge that we have within our businesses and within our country. Because if we think about the future, I think about my children or their grandchildren, is if AI is going to be in the way that courts decide, in education, in social media, in all of these different places, we sure have to make sure that, that we're preserving the Australian spirit within this technology. And so I think to answer your question is Australia has a while to go to become an agentic superpower. But the good news is that it's up for grabs at the moment. And I think there's a lot of foreign nations who would want Australia's knowledge.
David, great to talk to you today. Really appreciate your insights. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.